In the 2nd century of the Common Era, while Roman legions held the known world in their iron grip, the most powerful man alive sat alone in his military tent and wrote to himself about mortality. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome at the height of its territorial expansion, composed a series of private reflections that were never meant for publication, never intended to inspire future generations, and certainly never designed to become one of the most enduring works of practical philosophy in human history. These writings, which we now call the Meditations, were his personal spiritual exercises, his attempt to remind himself of Stoic principles during the grinding campaigns along the Germanic frontier. What makes this work so profoundly unusual is that it represents philosophy not as abstract theory, but as a living practice, written by a man who wielded absolute power, yet constantly struggled to master himself. The Meditations are not systematic arguments or polished essays, but rather the intimate conversations of a soul attempting to align itself with reason and virtue in the face of unrelenting duty, political betrayal, physical suffering, and the ever-present shadow of death. Marcus Aurelius inherited an empire beset by plague, war, and the corruption of a sprawling bureaucratic machinery that he could never fully control. Unlike philosophers who theorized from the safety of academies or gardens, he faced the practical moral dilemmas of governance every single day, deciding questions of war and peace, justice and mercy, while navigating the treacherous currents of Roman court politics. His Meditations reveal a man acutely aware of his own fallibility, constantly reminding himself not to be corrupted by the trappings of imperial power, not to grow arrogant or detached from common humanity. He writes to himself about the transience of fame, the vanity of conquest, and the essential equality of all rational beings, even as he commanded legions and administered an empire that stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. And what emerges from these pages is a portrait of someone profoundly lonely at the summit of human power, seeking solace not in the flattery of courtiers, but in the austere teachings of Stoicism, which promised inner freedom through the disciplined acceptance of fate and the cultivation of virtue regardless of external circumstances. At the heart of the Meditations lies a deceptively simple but radically transformative idea, which is that we cannot control what happens to us, but we retain absolute sovereignty over how we choose to interpret and respond to events. Marcus returns repeatedly to the fundamental Stoic distinction between what is within our power and what lies beyond it, urging himself to focus all his energy on the former while accepting the latter with equanimity. External events, he reminds himself, are neither good nor bad in themselves, and they become so only through the judgments we impose upon them. And therefore suffering arises not from circumstances, but from our opinions about those circumstances. This teaching leads him to advocate for a constant vigilance over one's own thoughts, a discipline of assent in which we carefully examine each impression before allowing it to shape our emotional responses. He writes of training himself to see death not as a terror, but as a natural transformation, to view insults not as injuries, but as the confused opinions of others, and to recognize that the present moment is all we truly possess, since the past is gone and the future remains uncertain. Marcus develops a cosmic perspective that frames individual human life within the vast impersonal processes of nature, arguing that we are each brief configurations of matter temporarily endowed with reason before we dissolve back into the elements. This vision might seem bleak or nihilistic, but for Marcus it serves as a source of profound consolation and moral clarity, because it reveals that we are all parts of a single rational whole, citizens of a universal city governed by logos, or cosmic reason. From this vantage point, the petty concerns that usually dominate human attention appear small and ephemeral, while what truly matters becomes clear, which is living in accordance with our rational nature and contributing to the common good of humanity. He reminds himself that cooperation and mutual aid are written into the very structure of reality, that human beings are fundamentally social creatures designed by nature to work together rather than against one another. This naturalistic framework allows him to argue that virtue is not arbitrary, but represents the fulfillment of our essential nature, and that acting justly, courageously, and temperately is simply a matter of being fully human. The enduring power of the Meditations lies in its remarkable fusion of philosophical sophistication and practical accessibility, offering not systematic arguments, but lived wisdom distilled from genuine struggle and suffering. Marcus Aurelius never imagined that his private notebooks would survive the centuries to become a guide for millions seeking meaning in an often chaotic and indifferent universe. Yet his reflections speak across the ages precisely because they address permanent features of the human condition, which include mortality, disappointment, the gap between our aspirations and our achievements, and the challenge of maintaining integrity in difficult circumstances. His work reminds us that philosophy at its best is not mere intellectual exercise, but a way of life, a set of practices for cultivating inner freedom and resilience regardless of what fortune brings. In an era where we often feel powerless before forces beyond our control, Marcus offers the radical proposition that true power lies in disciplining our own minds and aligning our wills with reason, nature, and the common good of all humanity.